Hey, what's up everyone? Get ready because today we're about to break down one of the most unexpected and downright wild stories to hit the WNBA. Alyssa Thomas, who's been one of the standout names on the court, has suddenly found herself in some seriously hot water. But here's the twist, it's not just about her game anymore. Oh no, it goes way deeper than that. What started as a simple game fallout has turned into a complete PR nightmare for Alyssa. And trust me, this story's got all the drama you didn't know you needed. Now, before we jump in, let me hit you with this: what if I told you that a player, after a rough playoff run, didn't just face criticism but went ahead and dropped a bombshell accusation against the very fans that support the league? And not only did it backfire big time, but it also spiraled into one of the most talked about suspensions we've seen in a while. Yep, you heard that right. Stay locked in because I guarantee by the end of this video, you'll be left with your jaw on the floor, wondering how things escalated so quickly. This story is packed with twists, turns, and enough controversy to keep you hooked till the last second. So, if you thought this was just another routine player drama, think again, because what Alyssa did took things to a whole new level and the league's reaction. Let's just say, it's something you've got to hear about. Let's kick this off by talking about Alyssa Thomas and the incredible mess she's found herself in. Just when the WNBA was starting to get some much-needed attention, Alyssa stepped in and did the unthinkable. Instead of owning up to her lackluster playoff performance, she decided to point fingers at the fans of all people. Yep, she went on a full-blown rant, accusing Indiana Fever supporters of being racist. And if that wasn't shocking enough, she did this right after her team, the Connecticut Sun, crashed out of the playoffs in one of the most disappointing runs we've seen in recent memory. Now, let me set the stage here. Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever had just been eliminated, which was already a major blow for the team. You'd think the spotlight would be on their exit, but no, Alyssa had to go to the podium and make it all about herself. Instead of reflecting on her own performance, which was nothing short of embarrassing, she decided to turn the narrative towards fan behavior, calling out racism from the stands. Now, don't get me wrong, racism is a serious issue and has no place anywhere. But the way Alyssa handled it, completely disregarding her role in the game's outcome, was nothing short of a disaster. Rather than focus on improving her play, she chose to air grievances that only made her look more out of touch. It's like she couldn't handle the fact that people were criticizing her, so instead, she made the fans the enemy. And here's the kicker: by doing that, she's not only alienating her supporters but also digging a deeper hole for herself. Alyssa, if you're watching, let me tell you, this is not the way to handle criticism. Playing the victim when people are holding you accountable for your performance is only going to backfire. And trust me, it did. Now fast forward to the aftermath, and what we see is a player who's managed to turn the entire narrative against herself. Fans were already frustrated with her poor playoff, showing she only managed 8 points and 4 rebounds while shooting a miserable 33% from the field, but now, on top of that, they're angry. They're angry because instead of addressing her performance, she's trying to shift the blame onto them, labeling her own fan base as the problem. And this, my friends, is where things get even messier. So after Alyssa's bombshell comments, it didn't take long for the backlash to hit, and boy, did it hit hard. Fans, analysts, even her own team were quick to react, and none of it was pretty. Imagine this: you're one of the league's most hyped players, fresh off a disappointing playoff run, and instead of taking responsibility, you start pointing fingers. It's like Alyssa thought the fans wouldn't notice how badly she played and would just go along with her narrative. But nope. The WNBA audience isn't one to be fooled. First, let's talk about her performance. In that critical playoff game against the Minnesota Lynx, Alyssa couldn't deliver. Her stats were brutal: just 8 points, 4 rebounds, and a horrendous 33% shooting rate. That's a rough game by any standard, but when you're supposed to be the star player leading your team, it's even worse. The Connecticut Sun were counting on her to step up, and instead, she was barely a factor on the court. The team got knocked out of the playoffs, and guess who was at the center of the flop? Alyssa Thomas. Now, you'd think after such a performance, the natural response would be to own up. Maybe admit, hey, I didn't play my best and I need to work harder, but no, Alyssa took a very different route. She stood in front of the press and, instead of reflecting on what went wrong on the court, she launched into a tirade about racism from the Indiana Fever fans. She claimed that in her 11-year career she had never experienced such abuse. She painted a picture where the real issue wasn't her lack of performance, but the so-called hate coming from the fans. Of course, social media exploded. People were quick to point out that this wasn't about race, it was about her poor showing in a crucial game. Instead of dealing with the reality that she just didn't deliver, she chose to deflect, and it didn't sit well with anyone. Critics were all over her, calling out her attempt to play the victim and dodge accountability. Even former players and sports commentators chimed in, saying that her accusations were not only baseless but also harmful to the integrity of the sport. The situation spiraled out of control fast. Alyssa's comments were dissected, analyzed, and criticized from every angle. People were asking, was this really about racism, or was it just a convenient excuse to mask her underwhelming performance? It wasn't long before the league took notice, and what followed was a move no one saw coming: a suspension. Yes, Alyssa Thomas, one of the league's top players, found herself suspended, not for her gameplay but for her reckless comments. The WNBA made it clear that they weren't going to tolerate baseless accusations, especially when they're aimed at the fans who help keep the league alive. So, after Alyssa's controversial comments about the fans, the WNBA wasted no time in stepping in. The league announced that Alyssa Thomas would be suspended, a decision that sent shockwaves through the basketball community. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a clear message that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. The WNBA had been gaining momentum, with players like Caitlin Clark bringing in new fans and attention, and the last thing the league needed was for one of its stars to stir up unnecessary drama. Alyssa's suspension wasn't just about her comments, it was about accountability. The league couldn't afford to have players making inflammatory statements that could damage its reputation, especially when those statements were seen as a way to deflect from poor performance. The WNBA's response was swift and strong, and it left no doubt that they were serious about maintaining professionalism on and off the court. The suspension hit Alyssa hard. Not only did it take her off the court, but it also damaged her image. She went from being one of the most celebrated players in the league to a polarizing figure overnight. Fans who had once cheered for her were now questioning her motives. Instead of focusing on improving her game, she seemed more interested in stirring up controversy. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Right after a playoff loss when her team needed her to step up, she instead became a distraction. What's even more telling is the reaction from her teammates. While no one publicly called her out, there was a noticeable shift in the way the team operated. It was almost as if there was a sense of relief that someone had finally put their foot down. Alyssa had been a vocal presence on the team, but when you're not delivering on the court, that can start to wear thin. And for the Connecticut Sun, a team that had high hopes for the playoffs, her antics weren't just a distraction, they were a major setback. The league's decision to suspend her wasn't just a punishment, it was a reality check. It showed that no player, no matter how big their name, was above the rules. And for Alyssa, it was a wake-up call that maybe it was time to stop deflecting and start looking at her own performance. The suspension wasn't just about shutting down her accusations, it was about reminding everyone that actions have consequences. But let's be real, the damage had already been done. Social media was flooded with reactions, and none of them were in Alyssa's favor. Fans and analysts alike were tearing apart her statements, pointing out that it wasn't her race that caused the backlash, it was her abysmal performance. The narrative was no longer about her being a star player. Instead, it became about a player who couldn't handle the pressure, and when things didn't go her way, she played the victim. As the suspension news spread, the media frenzy surrounding Alyssa Thomas grew even more intense. Sports analysts, former players, and fans all weighed in, and the conversation shifted rapidly from her game to her comments and suspension. The overwhelming sentiment was that Alyssa had brought this upon herself, and many were quick to dissect every moment of her meltdown. One thing became clear: people weren't upset because of Alyssa's race, they were frustrated because she had used it as an excuse to cover up her poor performance. It was almost like she forgot that in professional sports, criticism comes with the territory. Fans expect athletes to deliver, especially in high-stakes games, and when they don't, it's only natural for the public to react. But instead of addressing her own shortcomings, Alyssa chose to make the fans the villains in her story. This move didn't just backfire, it exploded. Social media was flooded with memes and reactions, mocking her attempt to shift blame. People pointed out how, during the regular season, Alyssa had been hyped as one of the league's top players. She had moments of brilliance, no doubt, but in that crucial playoff game, she disappeared when her team needed her the most. Fans were ruthless in their critiques, and even some of her most loyal supporters had a hard time defending her after this incident. Then came the real kicker: former WNBA players and analysts started chiming in. They were quick to remind everyone that in professional sports, accountability is key. They pointed to athletes like LeBron James and Steph Curry, who have had bad games but always owned up to their mistakes. That's what being a professional is about, taking responsibility when you fall short and working to get better. But Alyssa, she chose the opposite route, and the backlash was swift. Critics were especially harsh on how she dragged Caitlin Clark into the mess. Alyssa claimed that Caitlin's fans were part of the reason she was so uncomfortable, but to many, it just seemed like another attempt to deflect attention from her own performance. Caitlin, who had been a rising star and a positive force in the WNBA, didn't deserve to be caught up in Alyssa's personal drama. Fans rallied around Caitlin, and the contrast between her rise and Alyssa's fall couldn't have been more stark. The WNBA, which had been hoping to shine a spotlight on the growing talent in the league, now found itself dealing with damage control. Alyssa's comments weren't just an embarrassment, they were a distraction from the real progress being made. And for a league that's been fighting to grow its fan base and increase its viewership, this was the last thing it needed. As for Alyssa, her path to redemption won't be easy, but it's not impossible. If she can take this experience, learn from it, and come back with a renewed sense of accountability, she might still have a chance to rebuild her career. But that's a big if. The fans and the league will be watching closely to see how she handles this setback. Will she continue to play the victim, or will she finally take ownership of her actions? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, the WNBA is moving forward, with or without Alyssa Thomas. The league is focused on growth, on celebrating the players who elevate the game, and on making sure that professionalism remains at the core of its values. For Alyssa, the ball is now in her court. The next move is hers to make, and how she responds will define the next chapter of her career.